Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angie Wallace. I am the PYA Director of Interior Training, and for that pleasure, I head the welfare group. Huge apologies for my voice. This is terrible timing to come down with a cold, but I promise you I will be brief in whatever I say. So just for your information, if you've not joined our webinars before, the welfare group is made up of volunteers, and our aim is to empower, to educate, and to support you, the yacht crew, through this mirage of complexities that this wonderful industry has to offer us. So today we are going to be focusing on crew welfare, trauma, and crew well-being. Along with me for the welfare panel is Dominique Schmidt, Samantha Morris, and Chandra Robinson. And we are incredibly fortunate to have on this panel a team of incredible experts in their own field: Captain Kelly Gordon, Emma Kate Ross, Amanda Beaver, and Chester Quintal. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves very quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to the rest of my welfare team, because you really don't want to hear this for the rest of the hour, I promise you. So thank you so much for bearing with me. And if I can ask Captain Kelly Gordon, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. So excited. So again, my name is Captain Kelly Gordon, and I am currently based in South Florida, West Palm Beach specifically, traveling the Great Lakes, the Eastern Seaboard, the Caribbean, and the Bahamas. So we've got a pretty good program. And I am very, very passionate about mental health and mental welfare of crew members on board, and have just really so happy to be a part of this panel to help make the changes and move the changes forward in the industry for what is very much needed when it comes to seafarer mental health and wellness.
Thank you. Emma.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this. My name is Emma. I am co-founder and director of a company called Seize the Mind. Seize the Mind brings mental health first aid training to seafarers and yachts. I'm an ex-yachtie myself. I have been a yacht chef for 15 years. And in my time on boats, I've had the full spectrum of experiences, all the lovely stuff, dolphins and phosphorescence and sun salutations on the heli deck. But I've also had the other events happen, and seeing that there was a little bit of a vacuum with mental health, especially when I was on yachts, I wanted to do something to kind of give back and make yachting even more resilient and even better than when I left it. So I do that by teaching mental health first aid and bringing all of that awareness, driving down stigma, talking about mental health, and empowering and educating people to look after their own and others' mental health on board.
Thank you so much. Amanda. You're on mute. Are you there? Okay, slight technical.
Sorry, I'm as a medical trainer. I teach the medical care on board ships with medical support offshore. I've been a trauma nurse in rural and remote and emergency medicine for over 30 years. I also run a university program at a university teaching nurses, doctors, and paramedics medical care offshore and inland waters, expedition medicine, and marine medicine, and extreme sports medicine. And I have also developed a psychological first aid for the university and the maritime industry, which is different from mental health first aid in many ways, because we're looking at a really clear framework on when to evacuate. And so it works really well with the evacuation for medical emergencies, knowing when to evacuate for mental health emergencies. And that has led me down the path to also specialise in resilience and create a resilience project for yachting.
Can't wait to hear a lot more about that. Thank you. And Chester.
Hi everyone, I'm Chester Quintal. I am the helplines manager of ICE1. I started at ICE1 in 2005 as one of their helpline operators, and I've become the manager eventually. So we operate a couple of general helplines for the seafaring industry. One is Seafarer Help, and the other one, which is very relevant here, is called Yacht Crew Help. And we started that helpline just before the pandemic. And it's a 24/7 helpline that caters to yacht crew. And we can be contacted on different channels of communication, including WhatsApp, emails, live chat, etc. Well, I'll talk to you more about that later.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Sam.
So this is to all the panelists. What, if any, trauma have you personally experienced, and the challenges that you faced? And I'll go first to Emma, please.
Okay, well, we're talking about trauma, so just to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page, when we're talking about trauma, this is kind of the exposure to an actual or threatened death, serious injury, or even a violation. And we've got a couple of different types of trauma. You've got individual traumas, such as kind of an accident or an assault. And when we talk about assault, obviously that could be either physical, emotional, or sexual. We also have ongoing traumas that we need to be aware of. That's kind of that long-term chronic trauma. So this can be bullying or long-term abuse. And then there's also mass traumas that we need to be aware of. So things like natural disasters, hurricanes, tsunamis, situation we can find ourselves on boats quite quickly, and also acts of terror. So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is a natural disaster, being in the South Pacific a couple of years after the big tsunami of 2006. We were in a marina in Tahiti, and there was a earthquake in American Samoa. And I was in Carrefour doing my shopping, and everything just went into kind of overdrive, like sirens blasting. It was pretty terrifying. All of the cell phone signal went down. So the captain, who was also my boyfriend at the time, was trying to get hold of me and the stew in Carrefour, couldn't get hold of us. And there was a lot of adrenaline, a lot of panic, a lot of people not really knowing what to do. And then when we got to the boat, it was just about kind of getting ready. And we had missed the timing to get out of the marina. Anyone who's ever been to PYA knows it's quite a long marina to get out of. So we were kind of staring down the barrel of the unknown. And there was a girl who had actually been through the Boxing Day tsunami, and she started giving us advice like, wear shoes so that when you are kind of swimming, things don't impale your feet, and then also put a passport on the inside of your clothes. And I was like, why? She's like, so they can identify your body should it go that way. And everything just started kind of overwhelming me, like waves of panic were kind of rolling over me, especially in the time when we had to kind of be as prepared as we were. So I kind of watched the panic. It was a little bit, it was quite contagious. And everyone just started, the whole mood just was really kind of like not sour, but very kind of sober and somber. And there was one guy who came up and he just started playing a song for everyone. He kind of just broke all of that energy by just reminding us that we're here, we're safe now, we've all got each other. And that was absolutely instrumental in kind of calming everyone down and starting to kind of pass on the information that we all needed to. But I realized that when I was in that kind of panic mode of my headspace, I wasn't absorbing information. I was just panicking. And only once I'd calmed down could I then be part of the solution. As it turns out, we were really fortunate. We didn't get too much of a big tsunami, but I'll never forget the kind of the fear going into it. And afterwards, kind of everything that collective event of having gone through something so traumatic and so kind of fearful. Yeah, I think that's the big one that came to my mind first.
Thank you, Emma. Kelly, Captain Kelly.
Yeah, so are you asking me to recite a specific instance of trauma as well?
Yeah, if you've ever faced any trauma and the challenges that you experienced.
Yeah, I have actually. In terms of trauma, I think maybe we're talking about welfare, and one of the things that I like to talk about specifically, in my own talks can be harassment, discrimination, that kind of thing. And then and what Emma's describing in her instance with trauma is unfortunately next level trauma. But I think also to remember that there's trauma that is elicited from everyday events that are ongoing on board, whether it be bullying, whether it be sexual harassment, whether it be drug and alcohol abuse, those types of things. And yes, I have experienced it firsthand as a captain, and I have been sexually assaulted as a captain by a former crew member. And the trauma that left me with here was difficult, and it took me a while to heal from that, because what entered my mind is, if this is something, how did this happen to me as a captain? How did and feelings of shame and guilt and fault and feeling not adequate to be leading and being a captain all entered my mind. I was just flooded after this specific instance happened with a former crew member, because then it instantly took me up to a place of disappointment and darkness and sadness, thinking, how could this have happened to me as a captain? What have I done wrong? Why did he do this to me? And all these serious feelings of shame and guilt, and like it was my fault, and what was I doing or not doing as a captain? And I had a really hard time struggling with it for a while, thinking that only happened to me because I wasn't a good captain. And so it took a lot for me to get through that, work through that, and process all of that, to know that having been assaulted even in command as the captain was not my fault. I did act upon it, and obviously the crew member was removed and no longer a part of our team, but that messed with this for a little while.
I'm really sorry to hear both of your trauma that you've been through. Amanda Beaver?
So obviously, being a trauma nurse and a paramedic for 30 years, there's been many, hundreds of CPR, roadside accidents, 8-car pile-ups. I've also been a professional sailor. I specialise in high-performance racing, and we support the ocean race and the America's Cup. So for many of us, also the trauma of losing people we love overboard, and in huge fatalities, and also on the super yachts, which I won't name or list, but you probably would all know about them. I think also for me as a medical trainer, and what's led me to look into psychological first aid and resilience training, seeking answers, and that's why I'm so supportive of the work Emma does with a mental health first aid, that's just should be prerequisite for everyone in yachting, is also counselling the crew that have been on so many of these boats that we see. You only have to look at the Cayman Islands. They have probably the easiest accessible medical and death reports, or morbidity reports, and they talk about Ocean Victory and Kibo and Calliope and Brunella, and some of the biggest tragedies we've ever witnessed. And working with those crew, going in to do the medical training with them, sometimes we're in situations where we've reenacted the injuries, and it becomes very traumatic. And also, counselling these people, it comes to also going through survivor's guilt as well, and knowing how it could happen to any of us. We do work in a high-risk industry. We have huge loads that we're dealing with. We're in the middle of the ocean. I was just working with a high-performance sailing team today, and we were talking about some of the problems in modern yachting, and that's that people forget that we're so remote. There's no ambulances where we go. And these days, with Starlink and so many communications and everyone talking to their friends and family at home, they can easily forget that they really are in the middle of nowhere. And then I think when they suddenly realise they're in the middle of nowhere, it can be extremely confronting. And I'm sure we've all been in that situation at sea at some time. So some of the challenges I've personally experienced, which is why I'm sitting here today and so passionate about how to follow all of you and seeing the work, incredible work you do, is being brave enough to ask and seek for help. I think yachting is a very, no offense anyone, but we're kind of backward. You know, when I look at the work we do in hospitals and how well we're supported, we're really like in the 80s or 90s in terms of dealing with things, and there's still such a stigma around going to therapy and getting help. And then something that I feel quite passionate about and why I had to sort of stand up and have a voice is, once again, no offense to anyone who's done this, but I don't really agree with people who go to Bali for 3 days and become a trauma-informed counsellor and are then dealing with people that have been in huge traumas, such as the ones, you know, Kelly and Emma have listed, and myself. And so I think we need to, you know, really be brave enough as a team. And so often it's just made to go away and there's a trauma on board, and then suddenly it's like, oh, let's go snorkeling, and the boss wants champagne. And people are like, something really crazy just happened, and we've just seen our friend disappear, you know, in an ambulance, and we don't know if we'll ever see them again. Plus, we were the first responders, and it's huge to process. And if that is not treated well with briefs and debriefs, and, you know, psychological and sociological teams coming in that are highly trained, because when people are not trained to open a can of worms in the whole debrief, you know, therapy process, if you open a can of worms that person's not ready to open, it's fatal. And where the sort of programs and university and then training with men to do what they do. And so, sorry guys, but you can't just go and get that certificate in a few weeks. And this is something we have to take really seriously. We need to have really good resources. So, and for me, being brave enough to say I'm not okay, because there was a big stigma around asking for help, for me to be brave enough to say, you know, which is something I try and do in my courses now, is say, yes, I use therapy, and we've all had traumas, and you can't go this far in yachting. And, you know, and the biggest thing I want to leave you guys with is, what really hit me was switching hats. And what I found is, when I was on a boat racing, I was there, like, yes, of course, being a nurse got me on lots of good boats to race on, but I was there like trimming sails or, you know, pushing buttons for winches or doing something. I wasn't actually there with my medic hat on. When I go into resus, I've got my scrubs on, I've got a stethoscope around my back, and I'm ready to enter the war zone. I'm ready for carnage. When I'm on a boat, I'm there like thinking about what wrap we're going to have for lunch and the sail trim and what the sails are doing. And, you know, I'm not in that headspace. So even if someone breaks a finger and their finger's hanging like that, that switching of hats takes so much more energy. And I realized that the way I was reacting post-trauma to minor injuries, like minor breaks, bleeds and burns, was equivalent to how I was reacting in resus after resuscitating a neonate. And I thought, well, isn't this interesting? And I'm lucky enough to have a lot of support in my work and a lot of people that work in my field, and a remote medics, which can be quite a professionally isolating job. And I've said to them, do you guys experience this? You know, when you're guiding, I work with a lot of mountain guides that do avalanche rescues. And I'm like, when you're guiding and there's an accident, is that a lot more intense than when you're a paramedic in the ambulance? And everyone says yes. So we have to acknowledge that just minor injuries at sea, when we're not prepared for it, take a lot more out of our nervous system than we realise. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Dom, I think it's over to you, actually.
Great. So Thank you so much for sharing, guys, all of your trauma. It just helps everybody not to feel alone, and we all really appreciate it. Obviously, our webinars are also all centered around crew welfare. So I've got 2 questions for Captain Kelly Gordon. The one is from one of our attendees, and she asked, what support did you seek after your trauma, and what would you recommend for other crew members who find themselves in that situation?
It's a really good question. And let me tell you what happened. I had taken my whole entire crew out after a busy charter season to the beach in the Bahamas. We were just kind of going to have a morale day. And I typically run a dry boat. My crew don't really drink. One crew member had a couple too many drinks in the off time that he did. And he pulled my bikini top off in the front of everybody, the whole entire beach bar and the whole beach. And that was quite embarrassing. Again, I went into a place of, how did this happen to me as a captain? I obviously am a terrible captain. I've done something seriously wrong in my career, because otherwise this wouldn't have happened to me had I been doing my job as a captain. And I really went inward, and for a brief period of time didn't deal with it as I should have. And fortunately, but unfortunately, I have spent many, many years in counseling and therapy working on other issues in my life. So I had the tools to handle it. And at the time, the only particular tool that I could use was that I'm not talking to myself right. And one of the things that I often say is that the conversations that we have in our own heads with ourselves are the most important conversations you will ever have. And so I had enough wits about me to go, okay, I'm not talking to myself correctly, but I couldn't talk to myself right. So I immediately went to the rest of my crew. I have a very close gang, which is another reason that this incident was just so hard for me to handle. And I said, guys, tell me, what am I doing wrong? They spoke to me, they brought me up, they assured me that I wasn't doing anything wrong, but then that wasn't enough. I actually had some conversations with Corinne Rayson, and I actually a few months back had a conversation out to dinner with Emma about this. And what really resonated with me was that when I shared with her that with Emma that I felt shameful of this, is that she told me I needed to get rid of that shame. This is not my fault. This is so. In the long and the short of it, I sought out therapy in some form, whether it was Corinne, whether it was my crew, whether it was Emma, and had to talk through it and work through it. But that brings me back to my years of therapy that I had I had anxiety and depression severely in my 20s. And so I entered intensive therapy, and that gave me the tools to be able to deal with that. So that's what I did. And I see the other part of this question says, what would you recommend other crew members to do in this situation? If it's something like this, you must immediately act. You must immediately say to this person, this is wrong. This is not acceptable. I don't appreciate it. And that's hard. It sounds easy in theory to speak up, but it is so hard. But you absolutely must. And look at it this way. When it's hard to speak up, know this: if you don't, you're perpetuating the problem. When you think of it like that, that makes you realize then that you quickly speak up. So this said, did you report the incident straight to management, and did you get support, or did you try to handle this yourself? I fired the crew member. I took care of it. Yes. So I went to management, and somewhat sadly, management said, you know, we've got a couple of more charters to get through, and we have a boss trip, an owner trip to get through. And I said, I don't care. He's done. He's gone. I was like, I will fix everybody peanut butter and jellies for all I care. And I knew that obviously I could find another chef, but that wasn't the thing. I mean, he had to go after that. That was just, it said so many things. So reporting it, yes, I did report it. And I did fire the crew member, and I did get support again, as I mentioned, working with Emma and with Corinne, and albeit brief with them. I can say that my conversation with them were brief, and they were just enough to pick me up, because I have tools from my past that I've learned and gained and developed with my years of intensive therapy for my anxiety and depression in my 20s.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I think that's important to to take from this is to maybe be proactive if something hasn't happened to you yet, and to go to therapy anyway. And then maybe we'll have these tools like you have. Unfortunately, that came from incidents beforehand, but I think we can learn from this and kind of pass this information on to other people. And obviously not everyone's a captain and able to fire someone who's causing issues in the crew, but just so everybody knows, the one thing we promote very heavily is reporting. And if you're too scared to do it yourself, there's many resources which we do talk about and post about that you can use to report if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself. So we really do encourage those two things. And then obviously lots of resources like these wonderful ladies and gentlemen that have joined us today that are here to help you in any kind of situation. So the second question, Kelly, is if a crew member comes to you, I know you're an extremely approachable captain, which is so nice and not always the case. So firstly, what do you do to make yourself approachable? And secondly, what do you do if a crew member comes to you with an issue like depression or anxiety or trauma? How do you handle that and manage it as a captain?
Let me go to your first question first. How do I make myself approachable? I have always lived by this ethos or this motto, whatever you want to call it, is to be myself, to be my most genuine, true, and authentic self. I have never been able to be any other way. And it's something that has always been very true to me since even I was little bitty. And going through life now and being 42 now, I see that that's the only way to be. For example, and I'll answer it this way. A big company in the yachting industry called and asked me a few weeks back. They said, "Hey, will you present a keynote speech to us or a workshop on how to build a brand?" And I said, "I'd love to take your money, but it's simple. Be genuine, be yourself, be authentic." So being an approachable captain, and for any other captains that might be listening, be vulnerable. That is the number one thing for me, is I'm vulnerable. When I screw something up, the whole boat knows about it, and I'm not shameful of it. And I find that being vulnerable and letting them know when I'm sad, letting them know when I'm grumpy, you can usually see the resting boat face, but I'm real and I talk to them about it. And I think the fact that I have just exposed so much of myself makes everyone feel like they can approach me. And then your other question was, what do I suggest for crew to do if they're in this situation? Repeat that to me, Dom, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's more if a crew member comes to you with, depression or anxiety or having experienced something traumatic. How do you manage that or handle that on board as a captain?
First of all, I absolutely realize that I am not a licensed therapist. That's not my specialty. My specialty is driving boats, weather, and navigation. But we all have life experience, and I think that we all need to learn to try to draw on that as much as we can. So I have had crew members come to me. I've had crew members come to me and us sit and us both have good cries in my wheelhouse over what's going on. And if I feel like I can get them through what they're getting through, sometimes people just need to vent. Some people just need to be heard. They just need me to listen, or maybe I can share past experiences. And I'm connected with my crew enough to know that and aware of I think human behavior in general, if I got them through that. But I always make sure that they know of the Yacht Crew Helpline. I always make sure that they know of Emma and Karen. And then I also tell them and make sure that they know, hey, these are the services that we provide on board. And I'll usually go check in with a crew member that is either senior or junior to them and let them know, hey, so-and-so is having a tough time, and keep an eye on them. If for whatever reason, maybe they want to come to you and it's easier, or something and I need to do something. So we're very close knit. And so I do, if I can lend an ear, if I can offer my experiences, I will, but I also offer advanced and formal official support and make sure that they know where to go and get it, and make sure that they know if they need therapy, if they need time off the boat, whatever they need, they're going to get it.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that was such an insightful answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I'm pretty sure not all captains have the same approach, so it's quite interesting to learn. Emma, I wanted to ask you about the mental health first aid. It's a two-part question. Like, what initiated this movement for you, and can you give us some insight on what the mental health first aid consists of?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, what was the catalyst? Actually, COVID, to be honest. I couldn't get onto my boat. I was stuck in England. I'd studied psychology. That had been my degree that I had abandoned for 15 years as I sailed around the world, much to my dad's horror. So I always had an interest in psychology, human nature, communication, connection, but I'd just never done anything to kind of honor it. So when COVID came around, I was looking for resources. I was looking for something, and I wanted something for yachting. Sorry, London. I'm just not sure if you can hear the sirens. Just to add a little element of drama to the webinar. So I completed the mental health first aid course. I was chatting to another chef. Hospitality in cities is very intense, much like we have intense workplaces on yachts. There's a lot of the same kind of things going on in hospitality. And a friend, Tobiana, had started a charity, a foundation called Kelly's Cause Foundation. She told me about mental health first aid. She told me how amazing it was, how it had helped her, how it helped her become a better leader as a brigade of chefs. So I went and did the course, and throughout the whole course, I just thought it was so brilliant. It's very similar to the framework that we use for physical first aid. So in physical first aid, you're following that framework of Dr. ABC. It empowers you, it educates you to kind of know that you can do things in the moment that could prevent further life loss, that could prevent further injury. Sometimes it's just about providing comfort until professional help arrives. But you've got those set of skills just to help you, especially when we're in kind of, raw, austere or wild kind of places like the middle of the ocean, as Amanda Beaver said. So while I was going through and learning it, I was like, this is made for yachting. This is what I've been looking for. This is what we've been missing. This is what I needed in my life. And I would have loved kind of going through and doing my STCWs and learning more about mental health, because statistically, you're more likely to meet someone who's having a mental health issue or going through something than you are to have like an arterial bleed or infant choking. And yet we're not talking about it because there's so much stigma and kind of shame wrapped around talking about mental health and mental health issues or conditions. So I did the course. While I was doing the course, kind of light bulb moments are going off. And then before the ink was even dry on my certificate, I became an instructor. I signed up to become an instructor and decided that I was going to create Seize the Mind and bring this kind of training to seafarers, to yachting, to an industry that I have so much love and so much passion for. I didn't want to kind of walk away after 15 years with all this expertise and all this knowledge and just be like, bye, kind of door closed, moving on with the next part of my life. Because I think that's really sad, especially for a lot of females on boats. We know that if you're going the officer route or the chef route, you kind of, it's ageless. But for a lot of interior roles and for female chefs, normally it's a kind of one-way door off boats. Either you get pregnant or something happens that you leave. So we get this amazing kind of mass of experience and expertise, and then we kind of lose it kind of between 35 and 45, which I always thought was a little bit of a shame. So I wanted to make sure that I still honored everything that I've done. And I was always thinking about the crew member that had their back up against their crew door, that felt alone, felt unsupported. And I never, ever, ever wanted anyone to feel like that ever again. So I was kind of doing it for that kind of like little Emma that I had been kind of my experience. And now working with Kelly, working with Amanda Beaver, it's just been so incredible working with these amazing women, developing this program, kind of making it and adapting it for seafarers, because it is actually a global program, a global framework that originally came from a Australia. And with Seize the Mind, I've been able to kind of get a special dispensation. So we've made it seafarer specific. We use seafarer case studies. So there's representation. You know, it's not just some brilliant human coming in from another industry in England or in London teaching you. It's me. I've been there. I know what it's like. I've been through the traumas. I know what it's like to do anchor watches. I know what it's like when you've had an irritating argument with someone and you have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with them and do a full day's work and go out that night for a crew dinner. So I think that really kind of made a big difference. And then finally, kind of the big circle turns, and my niece has just got into yachting. She's on her second boat. So now there is a 24-year-old deck dive, beautiful human that is cruising around. And now the impetus to make sure that we're creating a even better, healthier, more sustainable habitat in yachting for her is kind of what drives me and what gets me up and doing what I do. And then you wanted to, I kind of answered both questions a little bit. I gave you a little hint about mental health first aid. I mean, everything that you know kind of about physical first aid, it's not that you sign a Hippocratic oath. It's not that you are professional. It's not that you can, learn to be a doctor in the short time that you do first aid, but you can learn those essential skills that keep people alive, that keep people kind of out of getting further injuries, or like I said, just promote recovery. And the wider aims are to drive down stigma and discrimination about seeking help, and also to raise awareness of how many brilliant resources there are out there, like the Wild Medic, like Kareen Rayson, the crew coach. Again, I think that's so important for yachties. Having representation counts, having someone that knows what it's like to be on a boat, has actually been on a boat, then telling you about better ways to kind of think about psychological first aid or trauma medicine or leadership. That's where I kind of found my little place.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, Dom, the next question's over to you.
Oh, I thought it was me.
Oh.
I was going to jump in there and do my croaking. I'd just like to say that I have done Emma's course and it was amazing. And although I've done, many different mental health training and welfare stuff as well, but Emma's course is very, very worthwhile, very worthwhile. So do sign up, absolutely. And over to you, because I would like you to be able to explain to everybody how trauma actually does affect mental health and the well-being. And I think you did mention that you had a little handout to give to everybody as well. So if you'd like to explain, how trauma really does affect everybody.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. And I do have a handout. I just don't have access to Wi-Fi right now. I'm running on 3G to get it from my computer I couldn't hotspot, not enough Gs, but we will get it to you, and we can put it in the show notes below. So basically how I like to explain trauma is I've actually looked at animals and the work of Dr. Platchett to really understand how trauma not only affects humans but mammals. And one of the best examples I have is from actually horse riding, but I'm going to share it now because I think you'll get the hint. And an example is some girl is riding her horse through the countryside and sees a rabbit. It's all fine. The horse does nothing. They keep trotting along. They see another rabbit and another rabbit. Suddenly, after 13 rabbits, the horse bucks, kicks, throws her off and bolts. And she's like, why was that? I saw 13 rabbits. And he was fine. And what happened? Well, every time the horse saw another rabbit, he pushed it down and pushed it down and pushed it down and pushed it down in his body until suddenly his nervous system couldn't cope anymore and literally just exploded. And that's how I look at trauma in the nervous system. So we all know about fight or flight. And basically we're designed to have an incident where, traditionally when we were living in a cave, we'd see a tiger and we would either fight, flight or freeze. And these days, there's so many things affecting us that it's not necessarily the one trauma that we experience. It it's how that gets locked in our body when we haven't been able to process it and let it out. Let's use the example of when there's a trauma on board a vessel and we have to keep going. You know, we have to stay on charter. We don't actually have time to all go to the therapist and get wrapped in warm blankets and go, you know, for massages. You've just got to switch hats and crack on. And then suddenly you get to the other point, and I don't want to generalize now, I might be showing my age, but you get to the bar and you go out and have some drinks and suddenly the need for dealing with that trauma starts getting left behind. But suddenly more things happen and you keep stuffing it down and stuffing it down. And that's what's happening in our bodies. And then in modern day life, we're basically being chased by a bear, and we're being chased by a bear that's not there. And another perfect example is you get up in the morning and you haven't slept well, and then you go into the crew mess and you make your coffee, and then you feel it and someone annoys you, and then there's a ground fault and you don't have power, and it's one thing and another, and suddenly the boss has decided not to come in 4 weeks, he's coming in 3 days. And you haven't provisioned. You were supposed to have a weekend off. You had a flight booked home to see your family who you haven't seen in 6 months. So then you're disappointing everyone around you. You've got to tell your crew that, you know, that all their holidays have been changed. And these things just get locked in our body, and we don't have the means and ways to process them when we don't make time for therapy, when we don't get an ability to build our toolkit, when it's not cool to go and get your toolkit and get built. You know, the best advice I give any crew is to actually start getting therapy before you even need therapy, because Kelly said it so eloquently, because then you have the tools. So why wait till you see your best friend's hand ripped off in a winch to get the therapy? We should all be doing mental health first aid. We should all be building resilience. We should all be finding ways to not just help ourselves, but help our crew. And by doing this, we're going to be letting it out. Look at an animal. When an animal sees something that frightens them, they shake. We need to find the tools to shake it off, and also acknowledge how traumatic these even small experiences can be. And people always think trauma has to be something huge. And then people think that they're not worthy of trauma because they grew up in a happy family and they've sailed on pretty nice boats around the world. So who am I to say I'm holding on to trauma? But I go back to the changing hats and how that can affect you. Trauma is real for everyone, no matter what it is. You don't have to have, you know, been in South America and seen a 10-car pile up and pulled 10 bodies, or been on an oil rig in the North, you know, shelf when, you know, it blows up and have 100 people in the water that are dead. You don't have to have spent a week in a life raft with your crew members dying to have experienced trauma, you know, and the unnecessary demands of the industry. And the way that even with the abilities online to get therapy, the way we're constantly moving, we have the same problem in medicine, is none of us have a stable GP. No one has our medical records. We're moving and moving and moving and moving. None of us even have the same hairdresser or beautician. You know, it's constantly changing, which can result in some terrible haircuts and some really bad leg waxes, but it can also result in not having your mental health needs fulfilled. And I really don't like saying this. It's very confronting because I'm about to kind of rat on my own profession. But why don't we have mental health first aid and psychological first aid in the medical care on board ships? Why does someone get their medical care on board ships and be responsible for the medical needs and well-being of a crew? And actually, I'm sorry, but in the MCA, there is very little content around that. And it's just not good enough. It has to change. Because mental health is not the biggest problem in yachting. It's the biggest problem in the commercial maritime industry. And that is why we have so many mental health problems, because it's happening in the whole world, but we're away from our communities. And I was talking to a neuroscientist and psychiatrist in our village the other day about this, and the problem is the industrialized world. And actually, traditionally, Europeans that stay at home and have lunch every Saturday with their family and have that tight family unit have less mental health problems. We're on boats and most people don't even know what our parents are called. So then you lose a parent, or even your family dog dies. No one knows even what village you're from. So it's really hard to go. That was my first big lesson in yachting. And I guess that was my first trauma, is one of my best friends died at home. And I went and told the guys at the bar when I got the message, and they brought me a shot and, you know, said, you'll be right. And no one wanted to go deep. And the biggest problem with the world these days is we don't know how to go deep with people. We don't, someone says, I'm not having a good day, and I'm guilty of it too. You want to slap them on the back and go, oh, you'll be right. Cheer up. Let's have a drink. Or can I make you a coffee? And stop being so negative. Well, actually, sometimes we need to go get uncomfortable and say, well, how does that feel? And not try and be a psychologist when you're not. Draw on referrals and say, well, how can I help you? How can I support you? And how can we have these needs met? And I think, you know, if we all learn to be a little braver and ask people how they really are, and once again, going back to what Kelly said, is encouraging vulnerability and authenticity, we would have healthier workplaces. Because one of the biggest problems we have, and how trauma gets locked in the nervous system, is we've always got our game face on. And it's like, hi, I'm fantastic. And, you know, you want fries with that? It's not real. We've got to bring realness and vulnerability and reality into super yachting. It's okay to not be okay. And the more we can do this, and the more it's okay to have a bad day, the easier it is to, you know, seek then what we need from the professionals. Absolutely. And the other thing I'd say is, you know, we've got to find ways to have really strong referrals, and that's going to happen by people trying out psychologists and psychiatrists. Because I went to a psychologist once, and no disrespect to them, they were so fascinated by the industry, they stopped counselling me. They wanted to know who I worked for and how rich they were. And then I left more traumatized. So we need people that understand what it's like to be in remote and harsh and extreme environments. Because you know what? A super yacht is in a remote, extreme and harsh environment in the middle of the ocean. You might have nice facilities, but there are no ambulances where we go. Your family, you can't go home to them at night. It is remote, it is extreme, it is austere, and it can be extremely harsh. And so, you know, we need to work on that. And one of the easiest things I brought into my yachts and my expeditions is a simple traffic light system. And green is we're good, orange is I'm not so good, and red is actually I'm not okay. And what we do with our teams is we say, in the morning, you know, everyone just shut your eyes, and who's green, who's orange, and who's red. And you know what? No one's going like this to see who's red. And the people that are red are brave enough to put their hand up, and we can then approach them and see how we can assist them. And if we could just bring in really good briefs and debriefs and ask if everyone's okay and give them the space and time to express that, and then have decent referrals, we'd all be a lot safer, and our nervous systems would be a lot more able to, you know, bounce back and from the face of adversity. We would be more resilient.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I really hope actually that the people that are watching this are taking it back to their yachts and taking this advice on board. And I think actually, Mando, we need to get you up to IMO level into the think tanks, because I know the mental health first aid and the mental health training is being talked about at IMO level, but we need you up there as well, just to put your voice and your reasoning. Absolutely, that would be fantastic. I'll find out more. I am very much aware that time seems to be slipping away, and I know, Chandra, you would like to ask Chester something now.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Chester, so I just want to know what kind of calls come into the ICE One call center, and then can you give us a clearer understanding of who it is that's on the other end of the receiving phone call?
Okay, thanks for your question. So the most reported issues or types of calls that we get for the yacht crew help are cases of seeking employment. Interestingly, there's a lot of yacht crew there who are not very familiar or a bit confused on how to get employed in the industry. And we also have yachties who contact us for health or medical, including psychological issues. And there's those calling for information about many things, including how to get promoted, how to gain further qualification. Also, those having contract issues, like they haven't been paid for a few months or so. And most importantly, there are those who contact us increasingly these days about bullying and harassment on board vessels. So those are the types, the most common issues where we get contacted. So when there is a live chat, when there is a phone call or WhatsApp message or email, it's received by one of our helpline operators. So we are open 24/7, any day of the week, any time of the day. And we provide a multilingual, confidential, non-judgmental help or assistance to any yacht crew members who needs help. And our operators were mainly based in the UK, and there are also colleagues who are based in mainland Europe now, in South America, in Southeast Asia, and in South Asia. That's why we cover the world. And as I said, we are a multilingual helpline.
Thank you so much for that, Chester. That's really fascinating to know about all of the topics that have been coming in on your end. It was not what I was expecting to hear. All right, Dom, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, right. I just I wanted to push out a little question that came up into the chat. This is to the panel in general. Why do you feel that mental health has increased in yachting in the last couple of years? The job description is still the same as it was 15, 20 years ago. So what has changed? Anyone?
You said mental health has increased?
You talking about mental health issues or us talking about mental health a lot more?
Mental health issues.
I don't know. I think we're just talking about it a lot more. There's a spotlight on us. I think if we look back, there were a lot of these issues, a lot of these conditions, a lot of people going through incredibly hard times. We just probably weren't talking about it as much. So now that we're talking about it, we're raising awareness, we're shining a spotlight, we're developing resources, we're holding people accountable for behavior. I think that's why many people probably feel that there's more mental health on boats. But then also to Amanda Beaver's point, you know, we are accelerating further and further away from what our brains and our bodies have naturally developed and evolved to be. We are creatures that are used to living in tribes, used to living in multi-generational kind of tribes. We are used to having communication and connection be part of our daily lives. We know that if you look at all of the kind of the blue zones, all of the things that kind of help a person live a long, fulfilled, happy life, it's all about communication, connection, good nutrition, a decent amount of exercise. And I'm not saying you have to kind of run a marathon every single day, but, you know, getting up and walking every single day, going and get your food daily, eating with your family, communicating, connecting. And as we get further and further away from that, as we have, you know, instead of 150 connections that our brains have been evolved to kind of cope with and be okay with, we've got thousands of connections. We've got different types of communication, and that communication is not sitting with someone, kind of hearing them speak and listening to them and kind of even hearing their heartbeat. It's all little like serotonin hearts and little pings and little like all of that. And I think, you know, there's lots at play in the modern world that is increasing maybe people's kind of difficulty accepting and getting on with modern day life. You know, we've got cell phones, we've got poorer and poorer nutrition, we've got our focus being taken by a lot of different things. So I think there's a lot of contributing factors that probably are contributing to mental health becoming more of an issue. But I think we've got a double whammy there of now we're actually starting to talk about it and have accountability and go to therapy and know that there are resources out there. So it probably just feels like we're doing a lot. And especially after COVID, I think COVID, I mean, it was horrific in so many ways. We all lived through it. I don't need to explain that. But for mental health, talking about mental health or raising awareness, it was a little bit of a present wrapped up in sandpaper. So it now has lots of people talking about taking accountability, developing different courses or resources, and things like ICE1 coming into our knowledge. And we can't turn back now. You know, the genie is out of the bottle. Now that we're talking about it, now that we know that there are things that we can do about it, it's on us to start kind of developing things or taking things on in our own ways, individually and collectively as an industry, to make it a better industry for all.
Can I add something? I like to speak to my students a lot about this topic, and it naturally comes up, you know, especially when we get a group of captains together. And no disrespect to the industry, but one of the biggest problems I see is the rapid increase of the size of the vessels and the crew. So, you know, back in my day, we were on a boat.
Ever increasing. Yeah, the demands are ever increasing. I mean, what the demands that were on us 20 years ago as a captain are entirely different as to what's on us now. And so the demands are increasing, and it's all, we're all supposed to take on all of those demands with an endless, perpetual smile.
Mm-hmm. And the captains I speak to say that, you know, these days their bridge is like a swinging door of mental health problems. And we've gone from an industry, you know, where we were, say, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7, 8 on a boat, and working like a family. There were no rotations. I don't want to get in trouble when everyone likes their time off, but we were together and in it. People weren't leaving and coming back, and it was a small, knit, more family environment. The high turnover, the larger boats, dealing with bigger numbers, bigger personalities. And I hate to say it as well, so many people are coming in for the money, not the love. They don't have the why that used to be there before. Personally, I went to sea to go to sea. I did not care about the money. I was never driven by the finance of yachting. I was driven by the miles, the experience, and it was my biggest love. And I thought I was so lucky to be on board one of these boats. I didn't care what they paid me. And I think some people just don't know what they're signing up for as well. So that, I know that's controversial, but that's my 2 cents worth.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to wrap up because we're running out of time. I just want to thank everyone for your valuable insights and all the support you provide to the industry constantly. Captain Kelly Gordon, Emma, Amanda, Chester, you guys are all amazing. Keep doing the work you're doing. We really, really appreciate it. I just want to also remind people that there is a handout from Korean Racing, the crew coach, at the top of the chat. Just let me know if you can see that. And we have been recording this, so we are going to post it so you can share it with, you know, people on board. If you found it very valuable, please do. And it's there for you to watch over and over again. There's plenty of resources out there. Please keep an eye on the PYA socials and LinkedIn, because we're constantly posting how you can get support and help. So once again, thank you so much for attending as well. If you have been watching this, we really appreciate it. And yeah, we hope you found it valuable and interesting, and please be on the lookout for our next webinars.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Love to
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care,
Thank
stay
you.
safe.
Bye, thank you.